A normal workday, a quiet morning, a country waking up the way it always has, people lining up for the tram, mothers packing lunches, factory whistles echoing through empty streets. Nothing feels unusual until you realize this is the last morning anyone in this nation will ever choose their job freely again. Because by nightfall, something invisible but irreversible will happen. Not a battle, not a law, not a speech. An entire workforce will lose its freedom without even realizing it. As stormtroopers burst into the offices of Germany's trade unions on May 2nd, 1933, they weren't just seizing paper or buildings, they were seizing control of the country's paychecks. And the moment they did that, they unlocked a formula of power more dangerous than any weapon of war, a formula so effective that people didn't resist. They couldn't. Their jobs were suddenly tied to their loyalty, their promotions tied to obedience, and their ability to feed their children tied to the very regime controlling them. Fascist regimes didn't just control nations, they controlled jobs. They turned work into a weapon, and millions obeyed, not out of fear, but out of economic necessity. And the most disturbing part? The playbook they created didn't vanish with them. Its patterns still echo through systems we live inside today, quietly, subtly, relentlessly. Picture this. It's May 2nd, 1933, Berlin. The sun rises over a city that looks normal enough. Workers walk to factories, children head to school, shopkeepers unlock their doors. But by sunset, something fundamental has changed forever. Stormtroopers march through the streets, not to arrest criminals, but to seize control of every trade union office in Germany. Documents burn in the streets. Union leaders are beaten, some thrown from windows, others simply disappear. The police watch and do nothing. In a single day, the economic freedom of an entire nation vanishes. This is empire economics, where history and money collide. And today, we're uncovering one of the most chilling chapters in that collision. How fascist regimes didn't just control governments or armies, but something far more intimate. They controlled jobs. They turned employment itself into a weapon of mass compliance. And the methods they used were so sophisticated, so psychologically precise, that their echoes still ripple through our world today. Because here's what most people don't understand about fascism. It wasn't just jackboots and rallies. It was paychecks and pensions. It was the quiet terror of knowing that your ability to feed your family depended entirely on your political loyalty. It was the transformation of work from an economic relationship into a tool of social control, so complete that millions of people willingly surrendered their freedom just to keep their jobs. The story begins not with violence, but with a promise. In the chaos following World War I, both Italy and Germany faced economic devastation. Hyperinflation had destroyed savings. Unemployment ravaged entire cities. Workers and employers were locked in constant conflict. Strikes paralyzed industries while businesses struggled to survive. Into this turmoil stepped fascist movements with a seductive offer. No more labor disputes, no more economic uncertainty, just order, prosperity, and national unity. But that promise came with a price that few understood until it was too late. In Italy, Mussolini began the experiment in 1925 with something called the Pact of the Vidoni Palace. On the surface, it looked like progress. Major industries and fascist trade unions came together to create stability. No more strikes that shut down factories, no more lockouts that left workers starving. Just rational negotiation between organized labor and organized capital, overseen by a benevolent state. The reality was far more sinister. The pact systematically eliminated every independent voice in the Italian economy. Non-fascist unions were marginalized, then outlawed entirely. Workers could no longer choose their own representatives. Instead, they were assigned to state-controlled syndicates led not by fellow workers, but by fascist party appointees. Membership wasn't optional. If you wanted to work, you joined the syndicate. If you wanted to advance, you demonstrated loyalty to the regime. But what happened next would change history. The fascists realized they had stumbled onto something more powerful than any army. They had discovered how to make resistance economically impossible. The syndical laws of 1926 took this control to its logical extreme. In every sector of the Italian economy, there could be only one trade union and one employers' organization. Both answered directly to the state. Collective bargaining became collective theatre, with outcomes predetermined by political considerations rather than economic realities. Workers maintained the illusion of representation while losing all actual power to influence their conditions. The genius of the system lay in its bureaucratic complexity. Workers still had rights on paper. They could still file grievances, negotiate contracts, even win disputes, but every mechanism of redress flowed through fascist-controlled channels. The very people supposedly protecting workers' interests were the same people ensuring their submission to the regime. And then came the most chilling innovation of all. Employment itself became a political act. The Charter of Labour, enacted in 1927, made this explicit: employers had an obligation to hire workers who were official members of the appropriate fascist trades. But they also had the power to choose from the membership rolls, giving precedence to party members and fascist union loyalists based on their seniority of political allegiance. Think about what this meant for an ordinary Italian worker. Your job security no longer depended on your skills, your experience, or your productivity. It depended on your political reliability. Every day at work became a performance of loyalty. Every interaction with colleagues carried the risk of denunciation. The factory floor transformed into a stage where survival required constant demonstration of fascist enthusiasm. But Italy was just the beginning. When the Nazis came to power in Germany, they studied Mussolini's methods and perfected them with characteristic German efficiency. The destruction of German labour began even before Hitler became Chancellor. As early as March 1933, stormtroopers launched coordinated attacks on trade union offices across the country. They weren't random acts of violence, but systematic operations designed to terrorize workers into submission. Union furnishings were destroyed, documents stolen or burned, and members beaten in full view of their communities. The message was unmistakable. Resistance would be met with brutal consequences. Then came May 2nd, the day that changed everything. In a single coordinated action, the Nazis banned all independent trade unions and replaced them with the German Labour Front. Unlike traditional unions that represented workers against employers, the Labour Front included both workers and bosses under one organisation. Its stated mission wasn't to protect workers, but to create what they called a true social and productive community of all Germans. The language was carefully chosen. Community suggested voluntary cooperation. Reality was compulsory submission. Labour Front membership was theoretically optional, but any worker in German commerce or industry would find it nearly impossible to get a job without joining. The unemployed were often drafted directly into the organisation, given uniforms and tools, and put to work on state projects. The disappearance of visible unemployment became one of the Nazis' most effective propaganda victories, even as they were essentially conscripting the desperate into forced labour. But the true brilliance of fascist employment control lay not in its brutality, but in its psychology. The regimes understood something profound about human nature. People will endure almost any political system as long as they can provide for their families. Take away that ability, or make it conditional on political compliance, and resistance becomes not just dangerous, but literally unaffordable. This realization transformed employment from an economic relationship into a mechanism of social engineering on an unprecedented scale. Every workplace became an extension of the fascist state, every paycheck a reward for political conformity, every promotion a demonstration of ideological reliability. The workers caught in this system faced an impossible choice: resist and lose everything, submit, and become complicit in their own oppression. Most chose survival, telling themselves they were just doing their jobs, just feeding their families, just waiting for better times. But with each passing day, the system grew stronger while their ability to resist grew weaker. And the most terrifying part? It worked. The control mechanisms went far deeper than anyone imagined. By 1934, the Nazis had created something unprecedented in human history: a work booklet system that turned every German worker into a tracked, monitored, and controlled economic unit. Every worker received a document they had to carry at all times. Think of it as their work passport, but one that recorded not just their employment history, but their political reliability, their social connections, even their family's loyalty to the regime. This wasn't just bureaucracy. This was the architecture of total surveillance disguised as administrative efficiency. Employers could review a worker's entire political history before offering a job. Had they attended enough party rallies? Did their spouse support the regime? Were their children enthusiastic members of fascist youth organizations? The work booklet answered all these questions and more. But here's where the system became truly diabolical. The fascists understood that naked oppression breeds rebellion, so they wrapped their control in the language of benefits and community. In Germany, they created Strength Through Joy, a program that provided workers with subsidized vacations, cultural events, and leisure activities. On the surface, it looked like the regime cared about worker welfare. In reality, it was sophisticated psychological manipulation. These programs served multiple purposes. They created the illusion that fascism was improving workers' lives. They provided controlled outlets for social energy that might otherwise turn political. And most importantly, they created a sense of debt and gratitude toward the regime. Workers began to feel that their improved leisure time was a gift from fascist leadership, not something they deserved as human beings. The economic data tells the real story. Despite millions more Germans having jobs, the share of national income going to workers actually fell during the Nazi boom years, from 56.9% in 1932 to 53.6% in 1938. Meanwhile, income from capital and business rose from 17.4% to 26.6%. The fascist employment miracle was actually a massive transfer of wealth from workers to business owners, hidden behind propaganda and political theatre. In Italy, the corporatist system revealed its true nature through similar mechanisms. The Charter of Labour declared that work in all its forms was a social obligation, safeguarded by the state only to serve national ends. But what did national ends actually mean? They meant whatever served the interests of fascist party leaders and their business allies. Workers were told they were part of a grand national project, but they were actually being systematically stripped of economic power. The psychological brilliance of fascist employment control lay in its ability to make submission feel like participation. Workers still went to meetings, still voted on union matters, still engaged in collective bargaining. But every democratic mechanism had been hollowed out and filled with fascist control. They were performing democracy while living under dictatorship, and many didn't even realize it was happening. Consider the Italian worker in 1930, 5 years into Mussolini's labor revolution. He attended syndicate meetings where leaders spoke passionately about worker dignity and national pride. He participated in negotiations that seemed to win concessions from employers. He enjoyed job security that his father's generation never had, but every leader he voted for was chosen by the fascist party. Every negotiation was predetermined by political considerations. Every concession was calculated to maintain his compliance rather than improve his conditions. The lesson is as clear as it is chilling. Fascism didn't conquer through force alone. It conquered through paychecks. By making survival dependent on submission, these regimes achieved what no army ever could: total compliance disguised as economic opportunity. The workers who lived through this system left us a warning written in their own lives. Freedom isn't just political, it's economic. And when employment becomes a weapon of control, democracy itself is already dying. Understanding this history isn't about fear, it's about recognition. Because the patterns of power never truly disappear. They just wear different uniforms. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. If you enjoy learning how history and money intertwine, subscribe to Empire Economics for more untold stories.